So we will have some interactive parts in this webinar, and especially now when we have Clive with us from Australia, and I know that we have also other people that are not based in Sweden. So please, now I just want to. This one. Oh, like that. So please go to menti.com on your computer or on your smart device, menti.com, and then you will type in the code 4280261. Then we'll have to answer this question and see if, I guess Sweden will be in the lead here, but hopefully some other countries will show up, at least if all the ones that have registered will show up. Australia, I wonder who that can be. Now we got some more. Latvia.
Hey, Latvia, all right.
Finland, oh, welcome. Oh, this is great. Netherlands, Estonia, welcome.
Yeah. It's
India.
like a Eurovision Song Contest.
Yeah. Oh, this is great. We're covering Spain. This is lovely. But I guess, yeah, Sweden is in the lead, and Germany, and also some people from Germany, Estonia. Great. Yeah, so it's a global event. Good to see and good to hear. Very nice. I also have another question here. Let's just see if there's Norway. Yeah. Welcome, Norwegians. Perfect. I'll change the slide to another question, which will give us some information about where you work, in what sector you work. So please find the best option. Get a little background of where we're all from what sector. Okay, any from the construction sector, pulp and paper, forestry.
So we lost the slide there, I think, Nicholas.
Oh yeah, sorry.
It's all right.
Thank you for noticing me.
There we go.
You did see the land, the country slide, right?
It's moved on to the yeah, we did see that one for sure.
Oh.
We're on industrial sector now.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I can see I share my screen now. So okay, yeah, manufacturing industry is in the lead together with construction. Okay, mining industry. Okay. Thank you. So then we got a bit of a background who we are here in this global webinar meeting.
Yeah.
So I leave over to you now, Clive. You can share your screen and start your presentation. So it's great to have you.
Yeah, sure thing.
With us. The stage is yours.
It's great to be here. And hopefully the slides that I'll be using have just come up. I can certainly see them my end. Yeah, all good. So it's great to be here and a genuinely global event. And I must admit it was a little bit stressful the half an hour before the event. As Nicholas mentioned, we had this huge electrical storm move through southeast Queensland, where we are, and it completely wiped out the power. And because I didn't think about it, and this is about planning for safety, think about that too, I was on battery power. And of course, I've been using my laptop on battery power most of the day, and there wasn't much charge left in it. So I was a little concerned I wouldn't make it through it. And then the power came back on, so no problem at all. So I've got about 55 minutes that I'd like to just go through some material. Then it's Q&A or discussion, and I'm happy to hang around for that time, for that entire hour. Whether or not you have sufficient discussion or questions, that's another thing, but I'm more than happy to hang around at the end. So because I don't have that long, let me get into this. So leading safety differently from compliance to care. Now, for people that, because an hour is not very long, for people that have read my book or read Sidney Decker's material, perhaps Todd Conklin's material, you would have some background in some of the concepts I'm going to be discussing today. If those authors are new to you, if you haven't read my book, then at least hopefully in this hour we can go through some material that might just get you talking. When you get back to your teams or your leadership teams, might just start some really good discussions about perhaps how we can lead safety differently. And sort of, I will be talking a lot about words like care, that is on the screen right now, and trust, both of which I think most people would recognize as nice things. Care and trust, they're nice things. I just want to assure people that I'm not talking about those things because they are nice. Today is an evidence-based session. I'm going to be talking a fair bit about the research behind the approach. I just wanted to make that clear. It's not all about running around hugging people or anything like that. This is an evidence-based session. So look, just a little bit of background in terms of my approach, just to set the context really. So I'm a psychologist and my background is actually clinical psychology rather than organisational psychology. In fact, 20 odd years ago, working purely as a clinician, I had no great interest in or knowledge of safety. I was actually working in the field of the addictions, which is an interesting field. And I was the clinical director of a very large clinic over here on the Gold Coast in Australia. And sadly, and this is just the nature of addiction, but sadly, as the leader of that organisation, from time to time, I needed to sit down with a mum or a father or both to explain why their son or daughter was no longer coming home. That is, they'd passed away, usually from a drug-related event such as an overdose and so forth. Now, you're all very smart people, I know, on this webinar. You would realise just how difficult those conversations are. They are incredibly difficult. And so I gained a lot of experience, sadly, in a way, in grief counselling. And so when it came time for me to start my private practice as a psychologist, I did specialise in grief counselling. And what was quite interesting then, my phone started to ring a lot from EAP providers. That's what they're called over here, employment assistance programs. And that is what they wanted me to do was to go to a mine site, a construction site, or an oil and gas plant, usually a high-risk site, after a fatality on site. So the first thing that struck me, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone, is frequently those events occurred. This was news to me back then. I was nestled away in sort of clinical psychology world, not high-risk situations. Week after week, I was being asked to go to a high-risk site in Australia to debrief and counsel team members, family members, leadership groups after a death on the site. So as well as being shocked by how frequently these events happen, we kill about 200 people a year, by the way, in Australia with a relatively small population. As well as that, I was curious about the organisations and how they handled that. Because on the one hand, they were doing the humanistic things, if you like, bringing me in, for example, to counsel and so forth. At the same time, though, what I quickly learned is all manner of investigations and audits were going on, looking for violators and offenders. Effectively, you know, there's a lot of blaming going on. And for me as a psychologist new to that area, it didn't seem congruent that on the one hand, they're bringing me in to do counselling. On the other hand, they're looking for violators and offenders and so forth. And I thought, where else in the organisation do we use that language? You know, offenders, violate, but we use it in safety. That was interesting. The other thing was, after an incident like that, out come the press releases, which I'm pretty sure are usually written over here by the same lawyers because they all say the same stuff. And that is, we wish to remind everybody that our people's safety is our highest priority. And again, they're saying that as they're doing the investigations looking for the offenders. So this was a little incongruous to me. Anyway, week after week after week, month after month, attending these fatalities, for me, it was, well, what are these companies doing at the other end? That is, what are they doing to prevent significant harm? What are they doing to prevent fatalities? And you know what? The more I looked at it, the more it did not look to me or sound to me anything like I knew, both as a psychologist and a leader myself, that would bring people along on the journey to create intrinsic motivation for safety and so forth. There was, again, a lot of what I would perhaps harshly call platitudes. You know, your safety is our highest priority, our goal is zero harm, and all that stuff. But on the other hand, again, we had safety officers doing audits, again, looking for violators and offenders. And I'm thinking, who doesn't love being investigated by an officer, hey? Who doesn't love that? And I'm thinking, that cannot be doing much for trust, for psychological safety in the workforce. And all at once, it was like, surely in these high-risk industries, you want people to be free to speak up, to share mistakes, to share ideas. And on the other hand, you're doing all this stuff that will make that very unlikely. And so, look, after a while, my only goal at that stage was to try and help them to get better at preventing significant harm. So 20 odd years ago, I put an evidence-based program together. It has changed over the years as the research, as the evidence has changed. It's called the Care Factor Program now. And basically that's what we do most of our time. So look, let me just start with some of a couple of case studies. So the photograph on the left, a very common scene in Australia. Naturally, Australia is a big mining nation. That is from a coal mine, and I work a great deal in the mining industry. Now, this is a case study that came to a conclusion about a year ago. That on that particular mine, and this is a global mining company, a global coal mining company, we rolled out our Care Factor program across that site. Again, it went very, very well. Significant cultural shift, significant improvement in safety performance. So that was 7 years ago. A little while after that, though, the company sold the mine to a private equity company, who I guess masquerade as a mining company, but they now own it. And what they did fairly quickly was they got rid, if you will, of their salaried workforce, and they brought most of them then back as contractors. That's not the issue per se. Many companies do that. But anyway, that happened. Now, just last year, I got a phone call from the new general manager, who I've never met at that stage. And he said, Clive, we understand that you rolled a program here 7 years ago. People still talk about it. However, we've just had a really significant spike in injuries, a huge spike. We've done all of the investigations and the audits. There are those words again. And we simply can't seem to find a common theme. We're wondering if, therefore, you might come over and help us to understand maybe, some common causes, what's going on. So I said, sure. I went over there and I said, what I'm going to need is small groups of the workforce, and they must know that when I speak with them in their groups, that it is confidential. What they say in that room is just between me and them, for reasons I hope everybody understands. So they said, sure. So my first group, one of those miners actually said, he remembered me from 7 years ago when he was there as a staff member. He said, Clive, you would remember 7 years ago that if one of our people were operating in a risky way, or if we noticed something was just not okay, unsafe, what we knew we could do, and in fact, what we all did, was we knew we could stop the job, have a chat, intervene, and so forth, which is what we want, I know. He added, though, I've got to tell you, Clive, there's no way I'd be doing that right now. And just quietly, my heart sinks because I know what that tends to lead to. So group after group were saying very, very similar things. And I did test them. I did say, is this just a story that's sort of gaining momentum, or do you have some evidence for this? And they said, okay, Clive, you want some evidence. For example, a couple of weeks ago, one of our people stopped the job for a legitimate safety concern. And he said the following week, not just that one guy, but the whole contracting company he worked for gone, offsite. Do that once, huh? You do that once and word soon gets around. And of course, the word getting around was quite simply, way to kill a reporting culture in minutes and so forth. So that's one culture. I'll come back to that a little bit later. On the right is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. And I've chosen this case study quite deliberately. We do work a lot in the field of research, and high reliability organizations are perhaps the safest industries, high reliability, or HROs. So things like nuclear, things like aviation, where they almost have to be the safest, because even a minor incident could be absolutely catastrophic. So look, nuclear and aviation come together nicely in a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. So let me just use that as an example. Incidentally, for those of you on LinkedIn, and many of you I know would be, feel free to connect with me, by the way, but I did publish an article about this a little while ago now. But if you would like to dig a little bit deeper into this, please do so. I don't have time to go into too much depth here. But essentially that vessel, it's a floating city. There's about 4,500 people on that. And it's interesting with high reliability organizations. And this is a military vessel too. And it's quite interesting in that in times of crisis, they have what's called a deference to expertise. That is, the crew don't necessarily think they have to go to the captain if they think there's something wrong. They know immediately to go to the people with the most knowledge and experience in that area, because that's the quickest, most expedient thing to do. And in a crisis, they need a speedy response. If they went, for example, to the captain, he or she would have to go to the people with the most knowledge and experience. That all takes time. So they want a quick experience here. Now, the average age, incidentally, and this might surprise a few people, the average age of the crew on that vessel is about 20. Now, that's the average age. So clearly there are many people younger than that. And the case study I wrote about was an 18-year-old, new to the vessel, has not been on that vessel long, and he was working on the flight deck. Very busy, a very dangerous, very complex arena. And anyway, what he noticed was just a few pieces of paper blowing around on the flight deck. That's all, which most people, I think, would not consider to be of any huge significance. But anyway, this young person has shut it down, as any of them know they can do, incidentally. He's shut it down. Now, I reckon that's a big call. I reckon that was a big call for an 18-year-old new person to shut this thing down. So anyway, that has happened. That was interesting enough. But the following day, this is the bit I wrote the most about, the captain actually shut the vessel down again. And he brought every available member of crew up on deck. And in front of everyone, in fact, I was at a mining group recently. I said, what do you think happened to the guy? And this mining crew said, they shot him. They made him walk the plank. No, he actually received a commendation. Now, let me be clear. The commendation was not simply for speaking up. They expect that of everybody. Everybody tends to do that. The commendation specifically was for picking up on a weak signal, a few bits of paper, but taking strong action. Now, that's what high reliability organizations want. They know that a weak signal maybe isn't so weak in a little while. Maybe that's going to turn into a big signal. They want people to pick up on these things when they're small and take strong action. Now, think about it. As that young fella is getting his commendation, the message being reiterated to everybody else on that vessel is quite simply, around here, it is absolutely fine to pick up on the weakest of signals and to take strong action. Now, contrast that with the coal mine that I just mentioned, where everybody is now terrified to speak up. Now, the importance of these different cultures will become apparent as we move through. So look, when we're running the Care Factor program, one of the first questions we ask a group of leaders, for example, is quite simply, why do incidents happen? And most of the clients we work with are mining, oil and gas, construction, fairly mature in many ways. They've got lots of policies, procedures, systems, tools, safety management systems, PPE, all of that stuff. And yet, of course, they still have incidents. So my question is, well, why? And I let them chat that through for a while. And just to speed things up a bit, here are some of the classic responses I get. Well, look, they take risks. They don't follow procedures. They take shortcuts. They get distracted. They don't speak up, and so forth. Now, of course, the they here is the workforce. And so inherent in this response is a fundamental assumption that we have incidents because of our people, because of their behavior, if you will. And I learned a long time ago, behaviors are not the problem. Behaviors are expressions of the problem. And that's what I want to talk a little bit as we go through. If we just limit it to thinking about, no, that's just a stupid behavior, there's no learning in that. All you're going to do is wait for the next stupid person to do exactly the same thing, if that's the limit of our analysis. Plus, on that list, well, why don't they speak up? Maybe it's a bit like the coal mine, where the last guy that spoke up is no longer here. And that's maybe why nobody speaks up. They get distracted. We all do. It's the nature of our brain. Most of the things, incidentally, that distract our people at work are not even at work. Many of the incidents I've attended to do counselling occurred because people were distracted by things that were going on at home. They maybe just had a huge fight with their partner. One of their children are sick or something like that. We have a very limited conscious attention span, and our brains are more than capable of running on autopilot. As you all know, we all do that. We all get distracted. Well, we all take shortcuts. Again, our lazy brain or type 1 thinking is always looking for the quickest, easiest way to do things. And I'll talk a little bit later about how that translates into the difference between work as we imagine it is done and work as it actually is done. And there's almost always a gap between those two. We all take shortcuts. People don't follow procedures. Well, there might be some good reasons for that too. Maybe the procedure works very well in 99% of cases, but not when it's wet or not when it's humid or whatever it is. Work teams usually find different ways to do things. And again, there's reasons they do that. They take risks. Well, we all do. It's human nature to take risks. So all I want to say at this stage is, as long as we're saying it's about them, we're missing some of the most vital learnings possible. And that is all of those above, at least to some degree, influenced by their team culture and by leadership. An example is the coal mine that I mentioned earlier. And unless we actually get that up front in our minds, that it is not about behaviors. Behaviors are not the problem. Behaviors are expressions of the problem. Once we accept that, we can actually become a learning organization rather than a blaming organization. And I hope many of you see the difference between those and have that goal. So just very briefly, those of you that have read my book or indeed read work by Professor Patrick Hudson, that would be a fairly common sight in that sort of area. This is straight from my book. It's levels of cultural maturity. You notice I don't even say safety culture maturity there. I say cultural maturity. Even though I just wrote a book about safety culture, I don't really believe in safety culture. I believe more in culture. And frankly, if you've got a good culture, you're pretty much there in terms of the safety culture too. This is just cultural stuff. And just very briefly, because there's some other things I really want to spend our time on. Down the lower end, if you will, the apathetic, the reactive climates or cultures, there is a lot of what I've just been talking about. That is, incidents are largely seen as the fault of the workforce because they don't follow procedures. They're just frankly stupid and they do stupid things. Naturally following that, there is a lot in the way of punishment and negative consequences. As a result of that, there is a great deal of us and them, or us versus them. That is the workforce versus leaders. Secrets are kept from management for obvious reasons. And another thing I learned a long time ago is that as leaders, we can't fix a secret. You know, we can fix a lot of things. We cannot fix a secret. If you don't know what it is, how can we do anything about it? Unsurprisingly, the apathetic, the reactive cultures, they hurt way more people. They have way more serious incidents. Now, the arrows, again, compliance to care, we'll get into that shortly. But the main predictor, in fact, the greatest predictor of safety performance, and indeed high-performing teams, this is way beyond safety, is psychological safety and trust. Now, for those of you aware of Project Aristotle, a fairly recent study actually, it again demonstrated that psychological safety was the biggest predictor of a high-performing team. It's no different in the safety arena. All I mean at this stage, by the way, and I'll get a bit more depth on this as we move through, think of psychological safety as trust when it's experienced at the team level. That is, the whole team has a high degree of trust. Now, what we know is where there are high levels of fear, for various reasons, invariably there will be low levels of trust. And that almost by definition puts organizations down the apathetic and reactive levels, because how can you have a culture where people feel free to report mistakes and report near misses, share ideas, if they're terrified and they don't trust us? Now, equally up the more mature end, the proactive, the integrated, which is where the high reliability organizations would live, if you will. There it's the opposite. There's high levels of trust, low levels of fear, which is why an 18-year-old new guy can shut the whole vessel down. There's the us and them, or us versus them, has been replaced by we. And again, because of that high level of trust and psychological safety, everybody knows they can speak up, admit mistakes. So this is innovation also. It's not just safety, because they can share ideas and so forth. The top line is also very important, increasing flow of authentic information. Now, in Hudson's original model, he did note that it was important that the workforce were well informed by leaders, which I totally agree with. What it kind of missed, though, and what I'm going to suggest here, is the opposite is also true, in the sense that leaders need to be well informed by the workers. And that takes a little bit more effort to set that up. Unless we know from the workers what is going on the front lines, we'll never be as safe as we could. Now, let me just give you a couple of examples of the fundamental thinking, if you will, some of the fundamental assumptions leaders make in the apathetic and reactive, and then I'll go up the proactive area later on. Before I do that, though, think about these cultures, your organizations. Do you have one culture or many? Because I'm going to make the suggestion that all companies have many cultures, not one. And often companies make the mistake, they try to change their culture by focusing on the culture. And it invariably leads to disappointment. Number one, they don't have one culture. They have many cultures. Every team, to a degree, has its own culture. And again, you can't see a culture, you can't touch it, but man, you can feel it. And so forth. And so we need to be mindful of this, that there are many cultures. The way you change a culture is actually one conversation at a time, one leader with his or her team operating in particular ways. And when that leader has created trust and psychological safety within that team, they are maturing along that cultural dimension. When all leaders are doing that, well, fantastic. Now, look, in a moment of narcissism, I included a quote from my own book here. Forgive me, it just seemed to fit. And it's on the screen right now, but it's a truism. I have worked globally with many other global multi-site corporations. And what I see time and time again is that while they'll use from one country to another or one site to another, exactly the same values, vision, values, equipment, policies, procedures, PPE, that's all the same. And yet one of their sites can be operating at the reactive level, another one at the proactive level. Everything else is the same. So what is the difference? And I'm pretty sure you would get this straight away. The difference is leadership. The difference is leadership. Some leaders have been able, for whatever reasons that we might touch on, to create, at least within their team, high trust, low fear, a sense of psychological safety, and quite simply, others have not. And we'll have a look at why that might be. Here's one reason, and that is some leaders have this fundamental assumption about their people, particularly when things go bad or wrong. And that is, I call this, by the way, the fear loop. And it is a loop because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it starts with that fundamental assumption that people are the problem. They make errors, they take shortcuts, they don't follow procedures, they, all that stuff I mentioned before. Now, if that's our fundamental assumption, what we tend to do then is we watch them, we focus on their behavior. And listen to the language here. Language is a huge issue in safety. When they're being good, if you will, what are they, kids? But when they're being good, you know, they've gone 60 days without a lost time injury, we'll reward that. We'll, you know, we'll have a barbecue. We'll give them some hats and trinkets and key rings or whatever that is. Be very, very, very careful with those things. Very, very careful. There are some companies, for example, who will give cash bonuses for safety performance. Please don't ever do that. I've seen it time and time again. Somebody has an injury, nobody saw it, and they're very close to the cutoff day or date for their financial reward. So what do people do? They hide it. Literally, that incentivizes non-reporting and so forth. Be careful what you actually give rewards for. So reward good behavior. Equally, of course, we will punish bad behavior. Like the coal mine, we'll sack people. We'll put them on their third warning and then we'll sack them again. So this focus on behavior leads to a reward or punish mentality, which effectively is behaviorism, which is a school of psychology, a really old school of psychology. In fact, no self-respecting psychologist that I know, at least, has used behaviorism since the 1970s, unless you're training your dog, you know. And yet it's still rife in safety. Behavior-based safety is based on rewarding and punishment. We don't use that anywhere else, but we use it in safety. It's outdated and so forth. What this ends up doing is creating fear, high fear, that is low trust, and extrinsic motivation. So what we inhibit there, what we prevent is learning, and we prevent speaking up. Now, don't forget, these organizations hurt way more people. And when they continue to hurt way more people, what do we put that down to? Well, of course, people are the problem. Now, there's your self-fulfilling prophecy. And that goes round as a loop, and that becomes literally embedded as a culture. And that's not going to change until leaders change the fundamental assumption there about their people. So let's talk a little bit now then about this whole notion of blame. And this is a quote, I think, the first person I heard say it in these words was Todd Conklin, for those of you that read him. It's a truism in safety, and probably beyond safety too, and that is, we can blame or we can learn. Generally speaking, we don't get to do both, because if our culture is one that blames our people, very, very quickly, people learn simply to not speak up, to not admit mistakes, to not report near misses, because they need to prevent the harm. We can learn, and through learning, we can be much, much better at preventing incidents in the future. You're not going to get to that place if your focus is very much on blaming. And I'll come back to that point in a little while. So what about the proactive cultures, the generative cultures? They also tend to have fundamental assumptions about their people. And we call this one the trust loop. And again, it's a loop, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So instead of a fundamental assumption that people are the problem, this one's different, a lot different. And that is, it's an assumption that our people are actually the solution, recognizing that they make mistakes. We all do. They will take shortcuts. We all do. There's no point punishing people for human behavior, literally human nature. What we also know, as well as those things, is those are the people on the front line doing the job day in, day out. They know way more about doing this than I do as a leader. And what I know is I need to tap into that. And what I know is they will have most of the answers I seek. But of course, in order to get those answers, I actually need to get out there and ask. So this focus on our people being the solution tends to drive leaders more towards what I would call inquiry, humble inquiry. For those of you who've read Ed Shine's book, Humble Inquiry, you would know what I mean. And to me, the most mature leaders, that's what they spend a lot of their time doing. Humble inquiry, getting out in the field or bringing my crew in and say, what is it you need to do your job well and to do your job safely? Where is the policy that you're using fitting? Where have you moved away from it? Now, don't forget, if you want to get an answer to that, they must trust you. Otherwise, they're just going to pretend they've been doing the right way all the time and so forth. Now, when that's our approach, yeah, we're an inquiry. We ask a lot of questions. We start learning a lot. But I'm also creating relationships with my people. I'm out there building relationships. That alone leads to increased levels of trust, lower levels of fear, and of course, much higher learning. Now, when that trust is experienced at the team level, that's when high psychological safety kicks in. And that means we have now an intrinsic speak up culture, and not just speaking up about the bad stuff, if you like, or the negative stuff, or what's perceived as negative, but also ideas, innovation. And please remember that these organizations hurt way less people. And when they continue to do that, of course, what do we put that down to? Well, people are the solution. That also becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and becomes embedded in culture. Now, just at the bottom of the slide, there's a little expression several of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with. It's this very, very, well, it's in the research right now a lot for very good reason. And I mentioned this before, this notion of work as imagined versus work as done. And based on my experience, there is almost always a gap between how we as leaders imagine the workforce do a job, based on policies or procedures, and how the workforce actually do the job. There's almost always a gap for many reasons. It might just be more expedient, quicker, just better actually, even safer, but it's not how we imagine it is done. Now, the challenge here is where that gap exists, the current way of managing that risk, the risk assessments, the JHAs or JSAs, they're not meant for that gap or that difference. And the bigger, the larger, the deeper, the wider that gap can lead to some very significant harm. Now, here's what I'm going to suggest. The previous model, the fear loop, people are the problem. Where that exists, there will still be a gap between work as imagined and work as done. We just won't hear about it. The workforce simply won't tell us about it. And again, we can't fix the secret. And often that can lead to harm. And then we say, well, what the hell were they doing? Why were they doing it like that? Maybe they've been doing it like that for 12 months. We just don't know. Now, in the more proactive, the more integrated cultures, there may well still be a gap between work as imagined and work as done, but we will hear about it straight away because they will let us know. Humble inquiry. So guys, tell us about the procedure. It's great here. Doesn't work in this situation here. We need to change it for that. And we can, then of course, we can amend the JHAs, the risk assessment tools and so forth. So again, to me, the more mature companies, the more mature leaders, number one, they're aware that there will be a difference between work as we imagine and work as actually done. More than that, they have enabled their teams to come to us with that gap and let us know that gap exists. We can manage that. We can do things about that. We simply cannot fix a secret. I will recommend a book at this stage. And for those of you who have not yet come across Amy Edmondson's The Fearless Organization, I thoroughly recommend it. You don't have to be involved in safety. Just any leader at all, I believe, would benefit greatly from reading that book, The Fearless Organization. This is a quote from that book. And I don't need to go through the whole thing, but again, it's just echoing some of the things I've been saying. When a team believe they are so safe within their teams, they can admit a mistake. They're comfortable to share the mistake because they know they will not be ridiculed. They will not have any fear of retribution or punishment. They also know they can share ideas, innovative ideas, without being ridiculed for it. They will tend to trust and respect their colleagues. That's what trust looks like experienced at the team level. That's what psychological safety looks like. Also, Edmondson, this is another quote from my book where I quote Edmondson. She, as have I, noticed that psychological safety can differ substantially between groups, even within the same site. That is, once again, the leaders of some groups have been able to create psychological safety while others have not. And again, it does beg the question, How come? How come? And there may be quite a few reasons. Part of it is how we recruit leaders, how we train leaders, and so forth. I'll give you an example here in Australia. When there's a big mining boom on, and all of a sudden we need lots of frontline leaders, for example, mining companies will tend to promote from the floor. And the criteria they use to elevate somebody into a leadership role is not because they believe they're great leaders, usually. In fact, they've got no evidence for that. It's usually because they were really good operators. They were really good on the tools. But now they're supervisors, and I think because we've made them supervisors, mining companies then often think, well, now they're a supervisor, obviously they will know how to run an effective toolbox talk, or really engage their people in a start a shift meeting, or just really, build really good relationships. And frankly, many of them can't. And the least we can do when we put somebody in a leadership role is to help them with the skill sets they will require in order to do that. Another example maybe of why some leaders don't create psychological safety. I've worked a lot in underground mining here in Australia. And anybody who's worked over this way in underground mining would know that literally, as people came up through the ranks, became leaders, they were literally taught to lead with a pointed finger, what I call pointy finger leadership. And that is, you do as you're told, or you get your bum kicked, or whatever it is. So they were literally taught. Now, that is not a leadership style that actually creates psychological safety or trust, of course. That creates fear. And I was working with a leader in a workshop the other day, and he knew that I'd be working with his team the following day. And he said, Clive, I am one of those old school leaders. He seemed quite proud of it. I do wield the big stick a fair bit, and you're working with my crew tomorrow. And he said, you'll notice a couple of things straight away, Clive. They don't like me, but they respect me. And then I worked with this crew the following day. Let's say he was half right. They certainly didn't like him. Equally, they had no respect for him at all. They just feared him. And they hid stuff from him. If there was a near miss, they would never tell him. They'd never tell him anything. Now, again, that's just, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. That's what he knew leadership was. And again, fundamental assumption, not only are my people the problem, they're also really dumb and stupid. And you're never going to create trust and psychological safety that way. Now, again, I'm not talking about this because it's nice, all right? 2012, this study was done that I'll go through. It's an Australian study, and it was done on coal mines within Australia. And look, the last paragraph to me really stuck out. And this is it. This is one of the concluding remarks, that unless the mistrust of the workforce can be overcome, even the most well-intentioned and sophisticated management initiatives will be treated with cynicism and undermined. And I found exactly the same thing. And by the way, I still get exposed to this month after month. And that is a little bit like a coal mine I mentioned earlier. For some reason, a company has a huge spike in incidents. And what they'll do now is they'll react to that. They'll bring in, I don't know, some shiny new behavior-based safety program, or bring DuPont in. They might blow $2 million dollars. I'm talking Australian currency here. And frankly, if they have not first attended to the mistrust within the workforce, they've just blown their dough. They've just wasted $2 million, because as their new shiny program is going through, the workforce quietly is sitting there with folded arms. And what they're thinking and probably saying is, here we go again. Their latest attempt to fix us, because clearly we are the problem here. Again, if we don't overcome the mistrust, literally, the workforce will seek to actively undermine what is going on. So it's what I always say. First, create trust. Then whatever you do that's benevolent in nature, that's meaningful in nature, the workforce will tend to view it through that lens. It's incredibly important. Now, I'm just aware of the time, so I better speed up my talking a little bit. What is trust all about then? Organisational trust, trust from a leader to the team. Again, if you've read my book, you'll have seen this model. 3 key factors. And the fourth one could well be consistency, because leaders, if they want to build trust, they need to demonstrate these 3 factors quite a lot. Well, most of the time. 3 factors are perhaps no surprise with integrity. That is, I do what I said I was going to do. It's very difficult to create trust without that. The second factor, though, is ability. This is not all just about what's often called the soft skills, which is a nonsense descriptor. These are hard. So in other words, leaders need to be good at things. They need to be good at what they're supposed to be good at. Ability is important. That does not mean they have to be good at everything. Of course, nobody is. But leaders at least need to demonstrate that they have, well, they're good at what they're supposed to be good at, if you like. That's the second factor. Now, the third factor is what the academics call benevolence. 4 syllables. Bloody academics, huh? All it means is care. Why use 1 syllable when you can use 4? It essentially means demonstrated care. Now, that is, again, the third factor. Now, why I say you need all 3 is because 2 out of 3 is not enough here. For example, you can care about your team, you can demonstrate care, and you can demonstrate integrity. But if you're no good at your job, if you have no ability, I hope you can see it's going to be difficult to create and sustain trust. Now, equally, you can be really, really good at your job, high ability, and demonstrate integrity. However, if your team perceive you really don't care about them, of course, it's going to be incredibly challenging to create and sustain trust. Now, the research is very interesting here. To create trust in the first place, while all 3 factors are important, it's that integrity factor that stands out, perhaps intuitively. This is where it got interesting for me, though, 12 years ago or so. To overcome mistrust, which is a different thing, right? To overcome mistrust, by far the most powerful factor is that care factor, that benevolence factor. And that's really why we named our program what we did. It's that benevolence, that care factor is the most powerful component in overcoming mistrust. And that's the space we tend to be working in the most. Helping companies, helping leaders to overcome existing mistrust and to create that psychological safety behind it, so that what we do next can actually gain traction. It's never going to gain traction without that. Now, I do have a few questions here, and I know that there's a bit of a Slido hold. So I'm just going to maybe pull out of this for a second. Let me see if I can actually do this properly. Just bear with me while I fix this up. Oops. Oops. Now, hopefully I'm out. Now, I'm hoping that Nicholas is going to come in with some Slido questions. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right, precisely. So we'll go back to Menti, menti.com, and you type this code in if you haven't done so already. So here it comes. So the question is, do you believe that in general, leaders within your company care about their teams? Yes or no? And okay. Very, very positive answers here. We have some on the no side also.
Yeah, but predominantly yes.
Yeah,
which is what I would expect. Yeah, so the vast majority of people indicating that they believe in general leaders do care about their teams.
Precisely. Want me to change to next question, Clive?
Yeah, I think the theme here is quite clear, isn't it? While it's not unanimous, the theme is quite clear that the vast majority of people do believe that leaders do care. So yeah, maybe Nicholas will go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Or the next question, I probably should say. So do you believe that in general, leaders within your company are good at demonstrating care to their teams? looks like a little bit of a different theme here.
Yeah, it's nearly, yeah, around the same.
Yeah. But in reverse, right?
Yeah, in reverse.
Although that, you know, there's quite a few people saying yes. You know, some of our leaders are very good at demonstrating care, but there's quite a substantial majority not. Now, is it okay, Nicholas, if I move out of that now and
yeah.
share my slides? Or
Yeah, please do that. I'll stop sharing my screen. So thank you everyone for participating in the survey.
Indeed. I'm having trouble now. Trouble with the share tray. Oops. Is that working? Nicholas, can you see that slide?
No, I don't see it yet anyway.
No? Okay, just bear with me. Yeah, here we go. Let's have a look. Where's that menu? Yeah, bear with me, people. For some reason, it's not letting me share again. That's okay. I only had a couple of slides to go anyway, and so I can continue talking. And look, I'd love to have a little bit of...
Clive, do you want me to? I can share. I got your presentation here, so just.
Great. Well, if you thank you for that backup plan. Oh, hang on, it's come up now. It was just a little bit slow, I think, mate.
Yeah, now we see it. Yeah, we can see it now.
Yeah, it's just a little bit slow, but yeah, great. So there were the questions. So again, question one, just to reiterate, the vast majority actually of the audience actually believe that in general leaders within their own companies do care about their teams. What was interesting is when we asked question two, do we believe in general that leaders are good at demonstrating care? It somewhat turned around in that most people, the majority of people actually said, well, no. So to me, that's always been interesting. And by the way, this is a very consistent finding. So what does this mean? Now, look, we're happy to chat about this in a little while, but what it means for me is that it's not that leaders don't care. Clearly they do. Clearly, most of you believe that they do care. It's just that possibly they're not very good at, or they just choose not to, for whatever reason, to actually demonstrate care. Now, why is this important? Well, the reason it's important is when we work with teams rather than leaders, and we ask them question one, that is, do you believe that leaders care about you? We don't get as many hands going up. And think about that. If leaders, even though they do care, if they're not very good at demonstrating care, well, how would their teams know? How would they know we do care if we simply don't demonstrate it? And some of the conversations, maybe some of the discussion we could have, I would love your thoughts. And feel free to put some of these in the chat window. Well, what are examples of demonstrating care? Again, I'm not advocating for one moment that you now have to start running around your worksite hugging people or anything like that. But what are some examples of what I would call active care, demonstrating care rather than transactional care? And again, I was chatting with a leader the other day, a bit of an old school leader. And he said, Clive, of course we care about it. Of course we demonstrate care. We pay them. We give them leave. We give them EAP. And so that is not demonstrating care in the way that most people would recognize it. That is transactional care. Active care, demonstrating care is something very different. I will share with you the research I've done on crews, on teams, when I've asked them, what is, if you had to just nail it to one single thing that tells you that your leader actually cares? What is one thing to you that really demonstrates your leader cares? The answer is quite straightforward. The answer is quite simple. And that is, they said, they listen. And then we feel heard. And sometimes it's as simple as that. What I mentioned before, that humble inquiry, is bringing your crews in or going out there with them to do it, to actually ask those questions and so forth. So that's an interesting discussion in itself. Now, just by way of finishing off, because I'm aware of the time, I thought finish off with a few thoughts to me, just a few tips. Yeah, provide our leaders with the training, with the skills they need to create these psychological. Don't assume they know how to do it, because many of them won't. Again, we can blame or we can learn. Probably not both. Let's put our attention on becoming a learning team. Don't forget, it is our fundamental assumptions about why incidents happen that will cause us to focus on people as the problem or people as the solution. We get to change those assumptions. But just know that whatever assumption we're operating from, they will drive those self-fulfilling prophecies, either the fear loop or the trust loop. Yep, trust is key. And again, trust at the level of the group is psychological safety. One quick one, try to do less telling. I know sometimes we have to do some and more asking, that humble inquiry. Visible felt leadership, get out there. And again, transactional care, it's not enough. We actually do need to demonstrate it. A chapter in my book, many people would be familiar with this, after an incident is where companies often go badly wrong and do a lot of damage to trust because they take that retribution approach. Somebody must pay rather than putting all their attention where it needs to be, and that is the care of the victims. The primary victims and the secondary victims. Thank you for that little musical interlude, somebody. So those are just a few thoughts there. If you haven't already, you can hop onto Amazon and dig a little bit deeper than what I've been able to do in an hour. It's quickest and cheapest, I believe, on Amazon. If you can get Amazon, I'm sure most of you can, or I think any online book retailer. So feel free to look at that. And that is me done. So let me come out of this again, Nicholas. Hopefully I'll do it a lot smoother than last time.
Thank you very much, Clive. I think there's some, at least from my end, on your camera. I can see you from the nose down, so to speak. That happened after.
What am I doing there? Okay.
It happened after the Menti questions. Let's see. Oh, now. Now we see you.
That was. I've just put my laptop camera back on. I had my nice camera on, but for some reason. Yeah, when we went with the questions, it sort of took the camera off for some reason. I have no idea.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking, you still the power situation is good.
Yeah, lights are still on. There was a lot of thunder going on. Did you hear any thunder?
No.
Good.
Not from my end, anyway. So I was thinking now. A bit more safe now with the power factor, so to speak.
Yeah.
So this guy said that he wanted a 10 minutes break. So I hope that's fine. Yeah. So I'll put.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll put this timer on here. So we have a 10 minutes break from now, and then we will be back with the Q&A and the discussion part. So go fix your cup of coffee or tea or anything, and think about what Clive has been talking about, and we'll be back in 10 minutes when it's zeroed here again. So thank you. Okay, yeah, perfect. Back from the break, everyone. So thank you again, Clive, for your great presentation. So now basically we have 45 minutes for maximum for questions and discussion, and as always, there are no such things as bad questions or stupid questions or anything like that. Just shows that you're interested in these questions and themes, so please don't be shy. And in the chat, so if you have the possibility, please use the chat function. Otherwise, just raise your hand or unmute your microphone. But I see we have 2 persons that have added in the chat function already 2 questions. And first we have Anneli. So Anneli, please unmute your mic and you can ask Clive the question yourself. If you want, of course.
Sorry, you said Anneli?
Anneli, perfect.
Yeah, I was just reflecting before when we talked about, I think it was the survey, the Menti. I mean, it's one, the essence is, do the coworkers actually feel cared for and honestly cared, not patronized? And I mean, I think it all comes down to honesty and leaders not being afraid of showing emotions. Because you cannot pretend care. Care must come from inside. It must be honest. And once a colleague of mine said, you have to love your coworkers. It sounds maybe stupid, but somehow, it needs to be honest care. It cannot be played or pretended care. That was just a reflection from me.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. It's a brilliant reflection. And if it's okay, I might just add a little bit to that. You did mention there that it's felt when care is genuine care, and you use that word too. I think it's meant. It's not pretend. It's authentic, genuine care that is felt. Whereas transactional care, it's very different. Now you mentioned, some people struggle with that. In terms of, again, in Australia, the industries I work with, in the book, I labelled them perhaps unkindly as the macho industries. And all I mean by that is they are predominantly male, to a degree, old school male. And, there's still a lot of old thinking around that. That you pay people, why should you care? You can't be soft with people, otherwise they'll take advantage of you. And just actually, leaders getting in touch with their own emotions to be able to actually admit feeling vulnerable, saying they don't know something when they don't know. If somebody says, how are you? Rather than just immediately responding, good, just really reflecting on that. And if you're not feeling good, being able to say that authenticity, that genuineness, that willingness to be vulnerable is usually an indicator that you're going to find it a little bit easier to demonstrate care, as opposed to when I've got lots of psychological masks on to guard me from, all of those difficult emotions. It's quite challenging then to demonstrate care, I believe. So I think your reflection is a really good one.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anneli, for your reflection. And then next in line, we have Joel. So Joel, please turn on your camera if you want and ask the question.
Hello, everyone, and hello, Clive. Thank you for your presentation. It was interesting to hear your story, how you got into this.
Thanks, Joel.
But my question was about care, when care done wrong, because I've seen many times, if you have a simplified model, a simplified worldview of how accidents are caused, but you genuinely care about people, things can still go wrong, because I care so much about you that I'm telling you now that you have to behave in a safe way. And that's basically the question, because I think that is not in line with the philosophy you just told us about. And could you elaborate on that, on how care, depending on your worldview, can be a problem?
Yeah. Well, you used a very good example there. Often at the end of a pre-start meeting, for example, here, just before the people leave that room to go to their quite dangerous roles, you will often hear the supervisor say something like, be careful. Now that could be viewed as an act of care, telling people to be careful, but it is telling rather than asking. And that is not an intrinsic act of care. It's just a command, really. It's just telling people to be careful. People don't want to be careless anyway. Nobody wants to get hurt. So it's sort of a redundancy, and to me, almost a platitude. I published an article on LinkedIn recently that might seem counterintuitive. And the article was about, rather than parents, for example, telling children to be careful, which parents will do intuitively, because they do it because they're fearful of children. But what's much more productive? than telling kids to be careful is to ask them questions. All right. So when you're doing that, have you thought through what you're going to do? Have you looked at the weather and thought what you might need? In other words, that humble inquiry, if you like, just asking those questions gets people's conscious minds switched on about how they might tackle this task, rather than the rather glib phrase, which does nothing really to demonstrate genuine care or be careful. So to me, they are very different things. Telling people to be careful, to me, is not an act of active care, but helping people to understand the risks they face and how these questions might switch their brain on to do things differently to better manage their risks. I think we're getting closer there to demonstrating care. It's a great point, Yul.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I think we have Per who's raised his hand. So please, Per.
Thank you. And thank you, Clive, for a really interesting presentation. I've also read your book. I work for a mining company, so I tend to, some of the things you said, yes, I've seen them myself. That's true. We started to work very hard with our leadership a few years back because we were also getting the answers that the they and us, and it's about the workers not doing what they're supposed to do. And we've introduced values based on our values actually talk about care, trust, responsibilities. And if we ask our workforce today in informal surveys or surveys where we can't track who's answering, they actually say that, yes, the leadership has improved. We think that they truly care about us. But then we realize that we have another group of persons, and these are the informal leaders. These are very strong individuals in the workforce. So when the leader comes there, is excited, and the workers actually believe what he says. He's inviting his workers to speak up. The informal leaders might say, well, there goes the leader. He's been on another training, and let's go back and work like we've always did. So now we've started to work with informal leaders. And I think for us, that's the biggest challenge in the coming years, to be honest. What's your thoughts about these persons?
I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. That's where your power is, actually. In terms of influence, it's usually through the informal leaders. The quote I gave you earlier from the mining, the article on mining, where it talks about trust being really important. That same article actually talks about most, say, workers on a mine site. They're largely unaware of who the CEO is anyway. They're largely unaware of senior leaders. So senior leaders might well set the vision and the values, and they can have a great impact on culture doing that way. But at a day-to-day level, the workforce are largely out of touch with senior leaders. They don't know them. They don't spend much time with them. But they do spend a lot of time. They hear a lot from the informal leaders. Mm-hmm. And so that alone is one of the reasons that we should really be focused on giving those informal leaders all of the skills they need. Often they have them anyway, right? But that's where the power is. And often they can bridge the gap between a perception of a lack of trust of senior leadership. Let's face it, sometimes it's just really fashionable, especially when things go wrong, to blame the senior leaders. Even if I don't know them, I've never met them, it's just kind of a reflexive thing that we do. So it's much better, I think. It's much easier, put it that way, to actually build trust at that team level. And I said this earlier, and I mean it. We'll never change the culture by trying to focus on the overall culture, have it come from the CEO. I know we say top-down leadership. What the CEO and the board do is very important. But trust, psychological safety is usually built one team at a time, and often one informal leader with his or her team at a time. Now, if that team is high trust and low fear, they start moving up that continuum, that maturity continuum. When most of our leaders are doing that, then the byproduct is the overall culture matures. But informal leaders, they're our go-to people.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
And then we have Jonna. So Jonna, if you want, please ask the question.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your lecture, Clive. It was really interesting and useful, I think. But I'm wondering, my interpretation is that the workplaces that you've studied is mostly traditionally very male dominated, and probably also then male dominated within the leadership. And I'm wondering, could it be that the fact that leaders are not good at demonstrating the care is a result of the expectations that men are not, they shouldn't show emotion and show care in the same way? Have you seen any differences between male and female leaders or male and female dominated working groups?
What a fantastic question. And I could possibly alienate about 50% of the audience right now. No, I say this without negative judgment. You're absolutely right. By the way, things are changing, which is great to see. I know, for example, when I'm running a leadership workshop, and generally we cap numbers at 16 so that I can handle 16 people in the discussions and the activity. Beyond that, it gets a little bit much. If I've got, and this is rare, but if I've got a group that's roughly 50-50, male to female, I know that that group is going to be a lot better in many ways. We're going to go a little bit deeper. People are going to be prepared to be a little bit more vulnerable, and it's less likely that the macho masks will come up and stop people from actually sharing, as opposed to, say, an all-male group. And this is not a negative judgment on my own gender. You know, we're taught this stuff from an early age, for example. You know, males are strong and tough and, you know, all of that stuff. But what I know is an all-male group in mining, I have to work quite a bit. Well, I have to work harder as a facilitator to really get in there. All right. In fact, I think I mentioned this in the book. I was doing an oil and gas group, and these were senior executives. And I was just, I just put a question to the group in pairs to discuss. And that is, when they know, what are the signs within them that they know, you know, they're pretty strung out, they're pretty stressed out. And most of the group were chatting away, and there were these two guys, the two most senior people in the room, who were just kind of looking down, looking at the desk after a very brief conversation. And so, you know, I went up to them and I said, so I noticed you stopped talking. And they said, Clive, we were talking, we just kind of realized that after working in oil and gas now for about 40 years, we actually worked pretty hard at shutting this stuff down. And I know what they mean. And again, how can we be vulnerable? How can we open ourselves up to others? And how can we expect others to be, and I don't mean vulnerable in a negative, weak state. I mean, just being authentic, just allowing yourselves to be who you are. That's how you create trust, by demonstrating who you are, you know. How can you do that when you've learned to shut down those very signals that you're getting from within to protect yourself or to appear a certain way? So in short, the short response is, look, yeah, it is much more common for males to do that. And you're right, I do work, at least historically, in male-dominated industries, not exclusively. I do work in some industries that are much more, you know, a much greater range of genders. But yeah, historically, you're absolutely right. And to be fair to men, and I do, this is a part of the training that we do. We talk about the fact that our most deeply held beliefs, right, what I call our core beliefs, and this is the clinical psychology in me coming out, they are largely formed by the age of 7. So think about that, by the age of 7. And I often give them a glimpse into my childhood. So I didn't grow up in Australia, actually. I grew up in Wales, the UK. And like many in my generation, if I was out playing with my little friends, you know, as a 6 or 7-year-old, and say I fell over and hurt myself, go home, I know what I can expect to hear from Dad if I'm crying. Yeah, and that is, you know, now stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Think about that. What core belief do little males learn? It's almost a survival technique. Listen to those words. Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. So not only do I believe it is weak now, it's dangerous too, right? And so if that's my core belief, in other words, my core belief at the age of 7 is that demonstrating vulnerability, sharing my emotions is actually weak and dangerous. It's hardly surprising that males sort of echo those sentiments as adults. So a lot of my work with leaders is to help them. I never say you have to drop all your protections, you have to drop all your masks. Nobody should have to do that. You might want them, you might need them. I do, though, encourage them to understand what's behind the mask and occasionally just to lower it to see what happens. And the act of lowering our own mask as a leader has an incredible effect on my crew because they will feel more inclined to lower their masks also. And it's what we call authentic leadership. Bill George has written widely about it, and I would thoroughly recommend people read Bill George. Authentic Leadership is actually the name of the book. So look, that was a long response. I could have just said, you're absolutely right.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure that this could be part of the fact that the culture is what it is in those companies and in my company, and I don't. I know I've read studies that show that these parts of the manhood, they are really decreasing when you have a working group with both men and women. Then gender is not a thing. So that could be part of the solution as well, and maybe part of a theme in SÄKU in the future. Niklas.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then I think we had next in line Manfred. So please, Manfred. Your microphone is muted, Manfred. So
now it's better. Today you talked about a lot of interactions between, as I understand it, first-line managers and employees. So what's your take on how your thoughts and ideas and concepts would work throughout the organizational ladder, if you like, between different layers of leadership? Leaders are also employees to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we do work at all levels. We work from the board right through the contractors. Naturally, we pitch the message a little bit differently. Again, different leaders do different things. So board members are not going to be doing pre-start meetings. That's not a skill set they need necessarily. Nevertheless, a lot of the basics that we covered in the talk actually are relevant right through the workforce. Fundamental assumptions that we make. Whether I'm on the board or a frontline leader, the fundamental assumptions we make about our people will still have a massive impact. And so, you know, whether I'm talking with the board or frontline leaders, we talk a lot about core beliefs. We talk a lot about fundamental assumptions that people make and how they turn into those self-fulfilling prophecies. So effectively, when we run the Care Factor program, it's not even a safety course, right? It's a psychology course. It's a lot about communication and relationships, absolutely. So much of the fundamental concepts that we've touched on, at least today, would go right through the organisation with us. But we would tailor that message, literally what it looks like, what it sounds like when you're doing this. We would pitch that very differently to supervisors than we would for CEOs and GMs and board members and so forth.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Manfred.
You're welcome.
And then I see Torbjörn has raised his hand for quite some time. So please, Torbjörn.
Okay, well, I was thinking, allegedly there are companies recruiting non-empathic managers. So it feels to me you are always assuming that all leaders are willing. But what about this? How do you have any in a percentage of leaders that could be who actually don't have the aim of caring, and have even been maybe recruited not to be too empathic?
Yeah, and look, it's a great question. It's an interesting question. If somebody is in a position who they don't want to care, yeah, I think there may be still a role in the company for them. It certainly wouldn't be in a leadership role that has to deal with people. For my money anyway. I've got a bit of a rule in sort of the leadership area, and that is we manage things, we lead people. So I believe there are some managers I've met who don't actually lead people, but they manage things, and they can do a great job of that. Yeah, whether they want to care, be empathic or not, whether they have soft skills or not. If they're managing things, not a problem. As soon as people come into the equation, then if your mantra is, I don't want to care and I'm not really empathic, well, go do something else, would be my advice.
What about the percentage? Like your first question here, I guess it was 80-20 or 75-25. Is that typical, you think, for well-willing and evil-willing leaders?
Yeah, look, two different things there. I think those people say who just have no interest in caring, no interest in that stuff at all, they would be very, very, very small percentage. Like to me, 1 or 2%. Those who are good at it, very good at it, they would be equally probably 20-25%. The rest, though, I believe, see value in it and would actually probably prefer to be better at it. Some of them are not sure if they can. Some of them simply lack the skills. Some of them might be embarrassed. But I believe the vast majority of even male leaders actually do. They understand themselves because they've had leaders too, you know, and they understand that probably is, they would reflect the qualities of leaders they would want to have for themselves. And that's one of the exercises I do in the group. List for me the best leaders you've ever had. And the characteristics they describe are almost all people related. They're almost all relationship related. I think that is the vast majority. But yeah, the percentage that are good at it, good with people skills, probably 20-25%.
Right, and then 70 in the middle and 1 to 2% evil. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, probably.
Great, thank you, Torbjörn. Then we have, I think, some reflections from Anneli again. So please, Anneli.
Yes, reflections.
Welcome back.
One reflection that I have is actually that, you know, it is possible to get change, even if it's not a quick fix. And I think there is a key to one important factor, I think, is that the top management is showing the way and opening up. And one learning from myself and from where I operate is that the message must not be too polished, you know, it must come from the heart. So I would strongly advise to keep the communication department quite far away from the message, because when they get involved, it becomes very mainstream, I'm sorry to say, and there is a risk of that anyway. And you lose the soul of the message. Does this, I don't know if you understand what I mean, but I mean, if you really want to come through, it needs to come from the heart. And it's not about using the right words or the, you know, the company language. It really needs to be honest, right? Because then people will start listening and believe you.
Oh, I totally agree. And I could give you a whole bunch of examples of that corporate speak. The workforce do not care for it. And whether it's the communication department over here, HR actually play a leading role in in corporatizing the language. And look, I think sometimes there are legal requirements to communicate things in certain ways. I get that. For example, we've had companies, in fact, this was just yesterday, we're about to start a major rollout, a care factor program rollout for a company, global company. And of course, they do have a huge communications department. And so I had spoken with them about what the program is about. We have our own sort of information sheets that we hand out. As you mentioned, just written in very straightforward psychological terms that, but I don't mean psychological jargon, but I just mean very straightforward ways. So I think most people think, oh, that would be really good. The communication department, though, HR, they actually thought, no, we better do our own thing on this. And they put all of these weird logos on it and hearts and, I don't know, tinsel or something. And just the wording, they just corporatized it so much. I phoned them, I said, I wouldn't want to go to that. It sounds dreadful. So yeah, once we lose that authenticity, we just try, we overdo it. We just try to corporatize stuff. People just want plain language. That's what people just want to hear how it is for you in just normal language. I totally agree.
Thank you again, Anna-Li. And then next in line we have Göran. So please, Göran.
Hi, Clive, and thank you for your good presentation. So thinking about, I think you said in the presentation that the most important is really that staff and employees feel listened to and being seen. And if we work in a global organization with lots of thousand employees, and if we have a senior executive leadership team, and they think that the employees are the most important resource. For example, in some different countries, for example, Sweden, we have like a Work Environment Act that stipulates that you need to investigate the psychosocial work environment and to have less psychological safety. But it's like voluntary, you can say, in other countries. So, for example, have you seen any what do you think about having like investigation, anonymous service regarding humble inquiry, regarding leadership, psychosocial work environment, and also health and well-being? And also that the leadership, sort of say, go through the results together with the staff in an interactive dialogue, and together they find strength and maybe areas for improvement, and they do plans and they follow up. Because often my view is that we don't measure it because we measure other things like do employees feel that senior executive have like a clear vision where we are heading as a company? Do we have a speak up culture, blah, blah, blah? But it's on a more overall level. That's my experience. But can you elaborate a little bit, and have you seen any success stories to share in this topic?
Yeah, great question. Look, as organisations generally, we do too much measurement. But worse than that, we tend to measure what doesn't matter. And I think we need just to get better at measuring what matters. And a lot of people do a lot of safety culture surveys. I mean, we can do that for companies too. We tend to shy away from it because they don't really predict much. The best thing, if you're going to measure anything, forget lag and lead indicators. Lead indicators don't do much better than lag indicators, actually, according to the research. The best thing you can measure is trust and psychological safety. And there are very good, reliable and valid instruments to do that. But again, leaders need to be prepared then to hear the results. And without naming the company, we did a psychological survey for a very large educational institution here in Australia. And by the way, you probably know this, but when you assess leaders right from the board, right down to the workforce, almost every survey ever suggests that the leaders view things as better than the crews, right? That's every culture survey ever done. But on this occasion, when the results were presented to management, they were horrified and they wanted to blame the workforce. How could they think this? Don't they know that we do this and don't? So there is just no point, number one, doing any assessment at all unless you are prepared to hear the results. The second thing where companies go wrong is they'll do a survey, but they then don't share the results with the workforce. All right, so number one, they've just demonstrated to the workforce that was a waste of time and they're keeping secrets from us. So they're wrecking trust in the process. And then they hope that things are better in 3 years' time, so they do another survey. And of course, the workforce are thinking, what's the point? You didn't even share the last one. So a few things. You need reliable and valid surveys. There's thousands of different surveys out there. As psychologists, we specialize in measurement to a degree. We know the difference between non-reliable and reliable, valid and invalid instruments. So in other words, you need to check the reliability and validity scores. Get a real one, get a good one. Then test as many people as you can. You know, N equals whatever your population is, ideally, but that's not always possible. The more people you actually survey, the better, the more power in your stats, as it were. Then don't fear the results. We can blame or we can learn, right? Let's be a learning organization. We don't have to blame people if it's not what we wanted. Then really importantly, share the results with the workforce and what we intend to do with that. So, you know, there is a lot of validity there. I think the most powerful things organizations can manage are simply trust, and trust at the team level, psychological safety. That will tell you most of what you need to know, essentially, about your culture, as it were. When it comes to safety, you were talking before about leaders getting out there. That can be done really well, and it's also done really poorly. I believe there's a thing we do here in Australia a lot called the safety walk. I'm not sure if you have your own terminology around that or if you do similar things. That is, leaders get out there usually with, you know, a pen and a clipboard and a hard hat. They call it a safety walk, and yet it probably would more accurately be called an unsafety walk. Because what they're out there doing is looking for unsafe stuff, right? And then making notes about it, often taking photographs and stuff like that. Not a good thing to do. Imagine what that does to trust. But I was working with a company a while ago, and they have KPIs, all right? These are key performance indicators. And their KPI is each leader has to do 8 of those safety walks per month. So essentially 2 per week. Now, frankly, none of them enjoy doing them for good reason. So what they do, I learned, was they all leave it to the end of the month. And then what you end up with at the end of the month is all of these leaders on site with their clipboards and pens doing their unsafety walks. Now, of course, the workforce know they're coming. In fact, the supervisors say they'll be out soon, have a good tidy up, you know, get things right. So again, where there's fear, you get bad information. You're not even seeing things as they are. And I said to this company, look, if you must have KPIs, because I'm not a fan of KPIs and safety, by the way. If you want to kill a safety culture, just get a lot of KPIs. But if you've got to have a KPI, I said this a little bit flippantly, but I said, how about this? Number one, rather than doing a safety walk, why don't you just go for a walk? And as you go for a walk, have a chat and humble inquiry. Just chat with people. You know, are you getting everything you need to do your job well and safely? And I said, if you really need a KPI, how about this? What percentage, for your leaders that is, what percentage of your people's children's names do you know? And for example, if that was 80%, well, that also suggests they've been out there a lot, talking about non-work things, family things, stuff that's important to normal people. Now, look, before you have a go at me, I know that would never work in practice because you get some leaders out there, right? What are your kids' names? Got them. What are your kids' names? Got, and so forth. But the spirit of what I'm saying, I think, remains true. Take the KPIs out of it. Just get out there, ask some good questions, really engage with your people, ask about the weekend. So it was a great question with a few threads. So hopefully I've touched on a few there. Excuse me.
Yeah, it would be great if you could share some links to this validated service regarding trust and psychological safety. That would be great. Thank you very much.
No worries. I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, I'll ask Clive for the links, and I'll put them in the survey email so everyone gets it.
Yeah, you bet.
Then I think we have Christian who's with a raised hand. So please, Christian.
Yes, I'm curious on like what your take on integrity and personal values, and if it's okay with values in leaders that are kind of at odds with the organization, and to what extent?
Yeah, okay. I rarely find, I'm sure it happens, that people's personal values would differ greatly to most organizational values, only because most organizations tend to have those generic values of things like integrity, fairness, they tend to go for the big ones. And I think most people, probably at a deep level, would hold similar values. Where there is where it's not congruent, well, that could present challenges for the employee or for the leader. Let me say this at a wider level, though, about organizational values. And then I'll come back to personal values, because I think personal values are probably more important than organizational values. And the reason I say that is after 20 years of doing this work, I've come to the conclusion I actually prefer it when organizations don't have values or a set of values. And the reason I say that is because almost invariably, what they say their values aren't what they live. And many of you would know the difference here between what we call espoused values, that is what we say our values are, and on the other hand, in-use values, that is how we actually demonstrate our values. Now, where those two are lined up, that is, we do what we said we were going to do, what our values are, that's where the workforce do perceive integrity. The company's saying and doing, what they say they do. More common, though, is our values are on the website and on posters in the offices, but on a day-to-day level, our behaviours look nothing like those. And then what we create amongst the workforce is not a sense of integrity, but a sense of cynicism and possibly mistrust. And that is, frankly, most organisations. I don't think they mean to do that. Again, I was talking to an organisation lately because they wanted a set of values. They didn't actually have one. And to help them with that, I'd been attending some of their board meetings, some of their management meetings, and they said, so what do you reckon, Clive? And I said, well, one of your key values, I believe, should be shareholder return. And they said, what? We can't have that as a value. That's cold. And I said, if you're going to have a value, it needs to be a value that reflects you and that you can live up to. And frankly, that's the only one I've seen that you would live up to. But they wouldn't have it. They wanted integrity and fairness, which they didn't demonstrate at any stage. So what I'm trying to say from an organisational point of view, choose values that you can actually live up to. Or you do more harm than good. You create cynicism amongst your workforce and probably your clients and customers too. So this, for me, is where personal values are probably more important. Your leaders, your own personal values will largely guide how you behave with your own teams anyway, regardless of the organisational values. And given how rarely organisations live up to their values, I'd say you're much better off focusing on your own personal values anyway. Those are just my thoughts.
Thank you very much.
And then we have Buzz. So please, Buzz.
Yeah. Okay, good. Can you see me now? Yeah. All right. Great. Hey, great gotcha. Presentation, Clive. And I actually have the book here. I read it, and I can only recommend it to everyone that is online. One of the chapters in your book is about zero harm and other platitudes. And I actually remember a very interesting, almost heated discussion that we had within our organization about zero harm, zero accidents. And I must admit that I've been using these before as well. But let's say the more growing into the work, experiencing different cultures, where we are, I kind of believe that, well, this is perhaps not really the right way to express it. With that said, I don't mean that we want people to get hurt at work,
No.
but we might achieve the opposite from what we want to achieve. And I felt a bit misunderstood in that discussion. I remember that very well. So can you elaborate a bit on your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And you would remember, Bas, the chapter in the book devoted to that topic. Yeah, I've had some heated conversations with others about that chapter, and I still think I'm quite a moderate in that regard. There's other people like Dr. Rob Long, who I think are right in a much less moderate way than I do. But anyway, look, I'm an evidence-based person, all right? As psychologists, we need to be. We're evidence-based creatures. And I'm also a pragmatist. That is, I believe in doing what works rather than what sounds nice or what everybody else is doing. If there was one shred of evidence anywhere that demonstrated to me that having a goal of zero harm did any good, safety-wise, I might have a look at it. There isn't. There is a growing amount of research demonstrating that having a goal of zero harm actually leads to increased harm and increased fatalities. So number one, look at the research. Why that is the case, though, is this. Don't get me wrong, you know, in my company, we're small, you know, we've got 9 people. I don't want harm to come to any of them. Of course I don't. So philosophically, zero harm makes sense, right? At least to a degree. Psychologically, it doesn't. And that's because what tends to happen is that companies become overzealous about this zero. It's a binary goal, right? It's zero or it's not zero. And so they tend to become a bit intolerant of incidents because of the nature of zero. And when companies become intolerant of zero, just quietly, what ends up happening is reporting starts drying up. And again, you can't fix a secret and so forth. Many of you would have seen the boards maybe outside huge work plants, mines in Australia, other big work plants. The days since the last lost time injury, you know, 200 days since the last loss. Again, they don't work. In fact, they're bloody dangerous, excuse my language. What we know psychologically is the larger that number gets, the harder it becomes to actually report it. Because who wants to be the person that brought it from 200 down to 0? And if I can get away with it. So many of these, what I call platitudes, they sound philosophically correct. They sound okay. They sound nice. They sound like good things to have, but they're just platitudes. You're much better putting your effort into things that actually work, not things that don't. I was working at a site recently because, you know, there's zero stuff. They have it on shirts, you know, zero harm on the shirts, on the posters. And I noticed one of the guys had beyond zero on his shirt, beyond zero. I thought, what are you going to do? Reincarnate people now? I mean, come on. It just gets a bit crazy.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks.
Thanks for that question.
I see that we only have 3 minutes left of this webinar. So you've been very good with very nice questions and reflections, and 50 minutes. Yeah, just felt like 5 minutes. So very good. So I know we have 2 or 3 persons that I'm sorry to say, but we don't have time now for any more questions, because me and this guy want to say thank you for everyone for having been part of SÄKU this year, and have been sharing and being very positive about this. And of course, great questions today, and thank you very much, Clive, being very generous. And as I mentioned, this webinar have been recorded, so members of SÄKU can see it again, and contact information to Clive and his firm, and some bonus material, for instance, some books that have been mentioned by Sitin Decker and Todd Conkling and Bill George, etc., and the service that we talked about. I'll add that information in the email, so you'll all get it, everyone who was in this webinar. So thank you, everyone. Once again, happy holidays and New Year, and I hope to see all of you next year. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.
Thanks.